Raise your hand if you've seen this symbol. Now, keep your hand raised if you know what it means. This symbol is a call to justice. It represents the MMIWG movement, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. It stands for silence, both the silence of those who can no longer speak and the silence of the systems that failed them, of police who didn't follow up, of media that didn't cover the case, of laws that didn't protect. In many Indigenous cultures, red is sacred. It's believed the spirits of the dead can see red, so families wear it, paint it, march in it, to call their daughters home, to make them visible again. This talk is not just about awareness. It's about action. This project is rooted in a clear and urgent goal to raise awareness about this crisis among non-Indigenous communities and to push for policy reform that ensures Indigenous women and girls are protected and heard. It urges lawmakers, the Department of Justice, and both tribal and non-tribal law enforcement to act. And we draw from statistics, community voices, case studies, and culture, not to speak for Native people, but to stand beside them, because the stakes are life and death. Now let me introduce you to a few names. Emily Pike, 14 years old, San Carlos Apache. She was living in a group home in Mesa. She disappeared in January of this year. Her remains were found weeks later, nearly 100 miles away under conditions so brutal, they pointed unmistakably to murder. This is happening now, today. Pepita Madeline Redhair. She disappeared in Albuquerque in March 2020. Her family immediately asked for help, and they were told to wait, that she would probably turn up. So they made their own flyers, organized their own events. A year passed before police reopened the case, thanks only to pressure from her family and the community. Ida Lee went missing from the Grand Canyon in 1956. She was 25 years old. This is one of the oldest cases we were able to verify in our research. But her case was not the beginning. All of these girls deserve more. More urgency, more coverage, more care. Their families deserve answers. And instead, they get silence. And their legacies live on in a broken system designed without Native voices. This violence does not happen in a vacuum. It is part of a long, painful pattern rooted in the history of colonization. This violence didn't begin in the 20th century. In 1864, the Long Walk forcibly removed thousands of Navajo people to Bosque Redondo. Hundreds died. Families were split. Entire communities were traumatized. Later came the boarding schools, where Native children were taken from their families to be civilized. Many never returned. Abuse was rampant, and culture was erased. Then came the Dawes Act, dividing communal land and forcing assimilation. Tribal sovereignty was trampled, identity was controlled, and at every step, Indigenous women were targeted as symbols of resistance, as bearers of culture, and as easy victims in a world that devalued their lives. Today, those same dynamics live on in policy and policing. They live on in the way crimes against Indigenous women are handled or ignored. Native women are murdered at rates more than 10 times the national average. Indigenous women still face disproportionate violence. This is not accidental. It is the legacy of laws and lies. This is due to the American persistence of the capturing narrative, the idea that the removal of Native women from their homes and families is inherent in America, that natives captured settlers, that settlers captured natives. Take Pocahontas. We all know her name, thanks to Disney. But the real story? She was a teenager. She was taken. She was forcibly married to an Englishman and died overseas, never seeing her homeland again. And yet media still distills Indigenous women into flat roles, captives, princesses, victims. The full complex truth gets lost. And this pattern of misrepresentation, it's not an exception. It's the norm. Emily Pike's case has become one of the few to gain attention in Southwestern media. But even that attention reveals a deeper problem. Instead of focusing on who Emily was, a daughter, a teenager, a community member, much of the coverage emphasized her history of self-harm, past trauma, and prior victimization. The headlines fixated on the brutality of her murder, not the injustice of her disappearance. Her story was shaped not to seek justice, but to fit a familiar narrative, one that disqualifies victims who don't seem innocent enough. This is the danger of the perfect victim myth. If a Native girl has endured trauma, the media often treats her as complicit in her own death. Emily was not a stereotype. She was a child. She deserved more. But Emily is only one name among thousands. And that leads us to one of the most haunting questions in this crisis. How many Indigenous women and girls are missing, and why don't we know? In 2017, the Urban Indian Health Institute identified over 5,700 cases of missing Indigenous women. Yet the National Missing and Unidentified Persons database had only 116. Why the gap? Because many victims are misclassified racially, because agencies don't share information, because tribal and state jurisdictions clash, and because law enforcement often doesn't take these cases seriously. Even when cases do get reported, media coverage is sparse. And when it does happen, the narrative is often harmful. Victims are described using words like troubled, at risk, or worse, coded languages that distances empathy. Stories highlight past trauma rather than future potential. Consider Emily Pike's case again. They painted her as a statistic instead of a child, as disposable. This is why Indigenous-run social media pages have become critical platforms for visibility. Families are creating their own missing persons posters, running their own investigations, keeping their stories alive. Meanwhile, Indigenous-run Facebook pages like MMIWG USA often do more accurate, timely reporting than major news outlets. Grassroots organizing fills the void that institutions leave behind. But they shouldn't have to. So what needs to change? First, funding. The Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA, distributes billions of dollars to support survivors, but only a sliver reaches tribal communities. Many tribes must compete for small, one-time grants or rely on state pass-through funding, which often never arrives. The Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, has made strides, allowing tribal nations to prosecute non-Native offenders in some cases. But the scope is still limited, and implementation is inconsistent. The Not Invisible Act, passed in 2020, created a joint commission between the DOJ and the Department of the Interior to address MMIWG. It is a promising start, but more is needed. The commission must have binding authority. It must be resourced. It must report to Congress regularly, and tribes must be meaningfully included in its decisions. New Mexico once had a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Advisory Council, established to investigate missing Indigenous cases. But by 2023, it had stopped meeting, quietly disbanded. It's a pattern we see too often. Symbolic gestures with no staying power. We need more than commissions. We need legislation with teeth. What can that look like? Dedicated direct VOCA funding for tribal nations, not just discretionary grants. Right now, many tribes must compete for small one-time grants or rely on state pass-through funding, which often never arrives. This gap in consistent direct support leaves communities without the resources to respond to crisis in real time. Federal mandates for interagency cooperation between tribal, state, and federal law enforcement. When the Urban Indian Health Institute attempted to gather data on MMIWG cases, they had to reach out directly to 71 city police departments and 1 state agency. Yet 14 gave no information at all, and 18 never responded. This lack of cooperation creates massive blind spots in investigations and accountability. A national MMIWG database with Indigenous-led oversight. A centralized, comprehensive system is critical but it must be led by Indigenous communities and include mandatory participation across all jurisdictions. Media guidelines to humanize victims and report cases with dignity. More than 95% of the cases studied by the Urban Indian Health Institute received no national or international media coverage at all. And when coverage does occur, it often focuses on a victim's trauma rather than their humanity. Media outlets must be held to a higher standard, one that tells the full truth, not a familiar stereotype. Permanent MMIWG task forces in high-risk states, staffed by Indigenous investigators and advocates. Accurate data is difficult to find because many victims are misclassified or excluded entirely due to the lack of recognition of tribal affiliations. Until we build Indigenous-led teams with cultural knowledge and lived experience, these errors will continue. And until there are better tracking systems, we must acknowledge that even the best available numbers are incomplete. These are not radical demands. They are minimum requirements for justice, and they are what Native people are demanding. So where does that leave people like me? I'm a white woman. I'm an anthropologist. I come from a discipline with a long and complicated relationship with Indigenous people. Anthropology has often studied Native communities from a distance, objectifying instead of understanding. But that is not the kind of work I believe in. Anthropology has also taught me this, that real change begins when we stop studying people and we start listening to them. When we learn from Indigenous communities, not about them. When we speak with them, not for them. Allyship is not about saving. It's about standing beside, about using the platforms we have, our classrooms, our social media, our dinner tables, to amplify voices that have long been silenced. Non-Native women, you have influence. Use it. Demand policy change. Uplift Native advocates. Share their work. Question your media. Ask who is missing from the narrative. You are about to see the faces of Indigenous women and girls who are missing or murdered. Many of their cases remain unsolved. Many will never be officially counted. But they were daughters, sisters, aunts, mothers, students, leaders. They were loved. Please don't leave this room and forget their names. Say them, share them. Support the families still searching. Pressure your elected officials. Fund the organizations doing the work. Start the conversation and keep it going. Because this isn't just a Native issue. It's an American issue. It's a human issue. And these families should not be fighting alone. Ida Lee, 1956, Navajo Nation, missing. Lori Longchase, 1983, San Carlos Apache, murdered. Rhea Ann Ochoa, 1997, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, missing. Melissa Montoya, 2001, Jicarilla Apache, missing. Laverda Sorrell, 2002, Navajo Nation, missing. Ria Almeida, 2009, Tohono O'odham Nation, murdered. Elaine Small Canyon, 2015, Navajo Nation, missing. Misty Bedoni, 2016, Navajo Nation, missing. Melina Yazzie, 2017, Colorado River Indian Tribes, suspicious death. Wilhelmina Whitewater, 2018, Navajo Nation, missing. Cynthia Acevedo, 2019, Gila River Indian Community, missing. Jamie Yazzie, 2019, Navajo Nation, murdered. Pepita Madeline Redhair, 2020, Diné, missing. Candace Manuelito, 2021, Navajo Nation, missing. Shauna Toya, 2021, Yemez Pueblo, murdered. Randol Rose Bennett, 2021, Navajo Nation, missing. Ella Mae Begay, 2021, Navajo Nation, missing. Keisha Kutzwadawa, 2022, Hopi Hopi-Tiwa, missing. Christina Denise Carrillo, 2022, unknown tribal affiliation, missing. Markeisha DeClay, 2023, White Mountain Apache, unknown cause of death. Letitia Candace Desiderio, 2023, Navajo Nation, missing. Velma Jane Pinto, 2023, Navajo Nation, missing. Bertina J. Shields, 2023, Navajo Nation, missing. Yanishtaba Victoria Hudson, 2024, Navajo Nation, missing. And Emily Pike, 2025, San Carlos Apache, murdered. Thank you.